Everybody, how's it going? What's up? My name is Seth, your host for Apolloneering. Welcome to the channel, guys. I hope you're having a great day. I know it's a great day. We got the Skywatch conference going on in Branson, Missouri. Josh Peck, Stephen Bancars, Tom Horn, Michael Heiser, Derek Gilbert, Sharon Gilbert. The whole crew is there, and they're giving presentations on topics for their cutting edge research. And I've been tuning in all day listening to it. I was actually just listening to Derek Gilbert's presentation on Islam, the old gods, and man, super informative just to learn a little bit about where the gods of Islam came from. And they're actually very, very ancient. And so it's very fascinating to learn about how that stuff like ties into biblical history and the points that God is making in the word and everything like that. So if you guys haven't signed up for that, there's live streaming, on-demand streaming available for that. Make sure you guys check that out. It's super good. You don't want to miss that. But today we have a great interview. Today's topic is going to be Occult Hollywood. And William has just released a new documentary, so I'm super excited to dive into this. I was able to screen it for him and offer some comments, and he politely, accepted some of them, and it turned out to be a great film, very informative, very cutting edge, something that I haven't seen anywhere else. So as we go through today, make sure that you guys look up on Vimeo for that. The trailer's on YouTube. You guys can check that out. But I also want to give a plug here for the Daily Renegade. So the Daily Renegade is it's becoming like a Netflix of Christian fringe topics, shows, articles, the whole shebang, man. Anything that you want, if you're interested in the Nephilim, if you're interested in Genesis 6 conspiracies, if you're interested in prophecy and eschatology, if you're interested in apologetics, man, this is the place for you. And so it's quickly becoming a huge thing. We have 12 shows already on the Daily Renegade, and Josh is bringing in more shows left and right. I don't even know how we're going to keep up with doing everything that we're doing, posting everything and making sure that you guys are getting the information you want in a professional manner. And so if you guys are interested in that, make sure you guys check out the link in the description below. It'll take you. You could sign up to become a member for $10 a month or $100 a year. It's super cheap. It's less than a cup of coffee a day. And man, it's worth it. You get a whole slew of shows, including shows from myself. You get shows from Ryan Pitterson, from Gary Wayne, from Jared Cressman, and the whole you get the Daily Peck Report with Josh, and Christina just started her own show. Man, so you're getting a lot of content put out there, and it's just a great place. It's also a place for fellowship. So if you don't have a church that you're attending, or if you feel ostracized at the church that you're going to because people aren't really interested in the topics, well, it's also a place for you, because we have a message board. We have a place where interaction can occur. It's almost like a little social media within the site, and you're able to communicate with other people who have similar views on the Bible that you do, who have realized that this is a supernatural book, that there's supernatural events happening, and they're aware of that. So if you're interested in that, again, check out the Daily Renegade. It's I'm excited about it. I'm excited for our future and where we're going to be going. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce William, and then we'll talk about his documentary today. I think it's going to be a great discussion. So attorney, author, and researcher William Ramsey is a graduate of the University of California, Berkeley, with a degree in history. Mr. Ramsey also has a JD and is a member of the State Bar of California. He has written Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11 and the New World Order, Abomination, Devil Worship, and Deception in the West Memphis Three Murders, and Child of the Beast, Aleister Crowley's Shadow over Humanity. William Ramsey has also made 2 documentaries, Occult Hollywood, Volume 1, and Prophet of Evil, Aleister Crowley, 9/11, and the New World Order. And I think you need to update that because you now have 3, right?
That's true. Well, good point. I was just about to say that. Smiling.
Well, how's it going today, man? I'm so glad that you could be on the show with me.
Seth, it's great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, great. So today I kind of want to just start a little bit. This is kind of how I start with all new guests that I bring on, is just, introducing yourself, kind of giving us a little bit of background about yourself, where you came from. As a lawyer, getting into some of these fringe topics is kind of taboo, I guess you could say. And so how did you end up coming to Jesus and all of that shebang? So could you just tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, I was raised Catholic, so I was definitely from a Catholic family. I went to church, Catholic church. I went to confession, and as I grew older, I became more and more curious. Instead of kind of accepting what I had been spoon-fed, and I was always kind of suspicious of the priests. I still am, but I was always kind of suspicious about the structure of the Catholic Church, which led me really to read books. I was very inquisitive, so I would read books on history. I would read books on religions. And then really the most important thing I did was to get a copy of Scripture and read it for myself. So I just got a King James Bible and read it from the beginning to the end, and then flipped it over and read it again, and then read the New Testament. And that was really the most important thing. That was probably when I was 17 or 18, was really to figure out what was truth, like that question that Paul was asked, what is truth? So for me, it was really about reading and comparing, and I read a lot of other stuff. I was interested in religion. I kind of was trying to figure out Islam. I knew that wasn't for me. I was interested in the Old Testament, but really what the most important thing for me was the figure of Jesus Christ, and whether this unique tale was true, was the story of this person who had unique teachings and then claimed to be the Son of God and was resurrected. Is that true? And for me, through reading the Bible and praying a lot, that was confirmed to me. And so really would define myself as a Bible-believing Christian. Although I do go to Presbyterian Church, I would say for me, the proof of Christ's existence in a supernatural thing was very real. And it wasn't something that was real to me when I was younger. So that kind of led me to change kind of my perspective on life. I was very fortunate to have that thing, because then I really wanted to figure out other things. I got an education, and, it's just led me down to different plateaus of understanding. Like I thought I ascended, to kind of a mountaintop. And when I got on top of the mountaintop, it was a plateau. So I've just been climbing a series. Now I'm 50. I just turned 50. So that's really where it started. So my testimony of Christ is that the Bible's true, that I would say, I don't like the word fundamentalist, but I'm a Jesus Christ overall. So that's the most important thing to me. And, that's kind of my personal testimony.
Yeah, and it's fascinating to me because, you said you grew up Catholic. From most of my Catholic friends, and I don't want to place this on everybody because I don't think all Catholics are like this, especially when you talk about like the Jesuits or things like that. But a lot of Catholics, they kind of miss out on the supernatural aspect of the Bible, of our world in general, because it's ritualistic, it's traditional. Catholicism is, at least here in America, and it may be different in Mexico or some of those other Spanish speaking places, but especially in America, I just feel like it's been so unsupernaturalized that whenever you talk about some of these things like the angels descending on Mount Hermon and mating with human women, they're like, what? Like, no, that can't happen. And so it's just fascinating to me where you've ended up from where you began, learning some of this stuff, being kind of almost indoctrinated into Catholicism, and now writing about Aleister Crowley, the beast, the 666. Like, it's cool to me to see where God has brought you. And so I have a question though. You got a law degree, and then you were what's that?
The clouds and make himself like the
Oh, dang, hang on.
I think that's you.
Yeah, someone called me, and and then I had the conference playing on in the background. So that was Derek's voice you just heard.
Okay.
But okay, so my question to you, William, is that you said you got a degree in history and then you got a degree in law. What made you go down those two paths? And then how has that kind of aided in the work that you're doing now?
That's a great question. I mean, I think I became much more curious in a worldly knowledge sense, much more, because I think when I was younger, I think my understanding of really kind of worldly history and things like that were things I was curious about. And I definitely think that the training that I had and kind of the what I learned in school was very worthwhile for me. I definitely would go, if I did it again, I'd probably do it a lot differently. But I think that it also kind of, I because of the concentrations on those different subjects, history and law, then it was like I was satisfied understanding that. I was satisfied with my religious thing. And then I was trying to figure out, well, what's this other thing? What are these other subjects? So I was willing to kind of read other stuff. And I think that kind of an inquisitiveness, and also what's the truth of this thing? It's probably the original question I asked when I was 17 or 18 reading the Bible, by myself and trying to figure it out. So I think that kind of inquisitiveness is the same thing that led me to write these books. And also the fact that I don't think people were talking about these subjects that I thought were very, very important. I still think that what I've written about, fulfills kind of exposing evil. So I think that's primarily what my work involves, is really talking about things that others, it's not fashionable to talk about, or they're too afraid, or they're convinced that it's not real.
Yeah, and one thing that I've noticed in your books is that you do present a lot of history. I mean, because whenever you dive into someone's, ideology, you really have to understand its origin and where it came from, so that lends itself to understanding the history behind it. So getting a kind of secular history degree, did you find that what you were researching was a lot different than what you had been taught, or was it the same?
Well, there's definitely biases, that's like one of the things that you get from two secular universities. So, that's what I was saying. If I did it again, I would really consider going to a Christian school. I think that's probably where I belonged. But, you learn the bias. You learn how to, you learn the technique to survive, to tell whatever professor is telling you what to believe. If you want a good grade, you don't rock the boat, so to speak. So I definitely had some different ideas than I would say, but I think the professors probably did too, and we're not allowed to have a lot of unique outlooks. They had to kind of toe the line as well. So you kind of just get that idea from just the academic environment, university system. But there's definitely different. I mean, they don't have a biblical worldview. They don't have that. So I think that's a lot different. Like I have definitely a biblical worldview, which is a lot different than that. So.
Yeah. And gosh, I feel like that's a diminishing aspect of Christianity today, is that we're getting more and more of a scientific worldview rather than a biblical worldview. And we're trying to look at circumstances and our lives through this scientific lens rather than viewing it through the lens of Scripture and viewing it through that supernatural lens in a healthy manner, because it's so easy to look at our lives through, the physical realm about what's going on, but, without realizing that there's something else in a different dimension maybe affecting that, So, okay, good. Well, I want to get to the good meat of today's topic. And so we're going to be discussing your new documentary. So can you give us an overview on what it is and then the motivation for why you made it?
Well, I think it's really kind of more of a visual study of things that I had learned about the occult. So I made a first documentary, I think 2011, which is rudimentary on iTunes, a collection of things in numerology and kind of other more occult subjects. And this is kind of an upgrade, and I decided to break it down upon people who were either involved in the cult, knew Aleister Crowley, who believed he was Satan's prophet, so that's why I titled my book and Film Prophet of Evil. So then people could see that there are these occult supernatural forces and ideas that have been integrated into cinema that you're watching passively. So, I cover some people that people don't know, and then more commonly known people like Kubrick, Oliver Stone, commonly known. And the one was a guy by the name of Donald Cammell, who not a lot of people know, but he literally sat on Aleister Crowley's knee and was what I believe to be a very serious occultist, along with Kubrick, actually, for that matter. So, that was kind of how I broke. And Dennis Wheatley was a book writer who was influenced Ian Fleming, who wrote the Bond novels. And as you noted, that he was friends with Christopher Lee, who suffuses the occult history of cinema, really, if you really talk about him. And he, I tried to show firsthand that these guys were very knowledgeable about occult ideas and were familiar with the doctrines of the occult. So I really tried to portray that in the film and show people that it's there, even though it's kind of hidden or it's cryptic. It really, occult ideas really are in modern cinema.
Yeah, and as I was watching your film, and just ever since kind of diving into some of this research for myself, looking into more occult practices and symbolism and understanding the history of everything, it's really not hidden. Like they kind of just throw it out there. But the thing is that they rely on the apathy of their viewers to not have done their research, and so we're just getting subliminal messages through what they're preaching through their shows or television shows or their movies or even the music that we're listening to. And so
the people who are in the know see these numbers. They see the numerology of the 1177. I was surprised to find how prevalent 11s were with Stanley Kubrick, movies that I had seen but didn't understand. So I really perceive him as a real occult kind of giant, like a magus, really, in a way that I didn't before.
Yeah, and I mean the 11 isn't going anywhere. I mean, with the biggest TV show, right? Who's the main character?
Right, 11.
Right.
I did a study for that. It wasn't in my movie, but I'm sure they've heard one of my shows. I think I talked to John Pounders of Now You See TV. If anybody wants to listen to that, and I was like, this is like straight out of all my lectures. The Demogorgon is one of the 77 names of Satan. There's a smiley face at the end of season 6. There's 11. They do word plays with 77, so they've got the kind of occult numerology down. It's really, they did a remarkable job, but the 11's right there, the main character with magic, right? So,
yeah. And I have a question for you, kind of being, living in California and then just doing what you've been doing. Do you know a lot about the Duffer Brothers, like where they came from and their influence and why they decided to write Stranger Things?
No, that's a great question. I wish I did know. I think it was one of their first pieces, but my understanding is they were actually doing something on another kind of parapolitical conspiracy topic, which is the city what's the city out on Long Beach?
Montauk?
Yeah, Montauk. That was supposed to be the working title of Stranger Things.
Yep.
Elements of that, like the underground base concept.
Right.
Things like that. Yeah. But I don't know. Do you know much about the Duffer Brothers? I don't know.
Well, and it's interesting because I wanted to do a show on Stranger Things here in the near future. And so I was kind of looking into a little bit about the Duffer Brothers, and like you were saying, I don't know a whole lot. I just did like 10 minutes of looking up stuff online yesterday, so I haven't really done an adequate amount of research. But they originally had a script that was called Project Montauk, which for you guys who are listening, if you don't know about Project Montauk, that is like the foundation for not only Stranger Things, but also for like the elite. Like their whole goal is to brainwash these kids and to really have like these assassins like integrated into America and split personalities, study the psyche. That was all going on at in Montauk for Project Montauk. And so they originally developed the show, like you were saying, off of that name. And I think Netflix told them that they have to change the name because it was too conspiratorial, because it would push away viewers. And
has it been confirmed? I'm not familiar that much about Montauk. Has it been confirmed that that was a real program? Or was that just some kind of conspiracy? Because I remember, wasn't there a story about a ship that was materialized?
Yeah, that was the Philadelphia experiment, which was being done around that same time. And the reason that the Philadelphia experiment was done was because that was back during World War II, kind of towards the end of World War II, when the U-boats from the Germans were they were having great effect on the U.S. Navy. And so the U.S. Navy was looking into how can we camouflage or hide ourselves out at sea from these U-boats. And so they were trying this experiment in a port I think it was in, it may have been off Philadelphia. That's where the name comes from.
Okay, I thought there was some kind of something about that story that was attached to Montauk. I don't have my facts straight about that. I apologize.
Yeah, but Project Montauk, I think it has been confirmed. There's a guy, you've probably heard of him. His name is Stuart Swerdlow. He was he was an alleged person that came out of Project Montauk, and so he's been like the big voice for it. But Chad Riley. What's that?
I'm sorry. Please.
No, it's okay. I was just gonna say Chad Riley, Justin Westfall, or not Wes. Who was it? They had a show on it pretty recently where they discussed Project Montauk because they had a show on Stranger Things. But so you guys could go check that one out too. That's really good. It's on their Fourth Watch radio, which is really good. But all that to say, guys, is that things are not as simple or as straightforward as they may seem. And we're just talking about movies. Like, we sit down and we watch a movie with our family. We don't really want to worry about any of this satanic crap that goes on, but it's there, and they do it on purpose. And so that's kind of what I wanted to get into next, William, was we brought up Christopher Lee, and Christopher Lee has a very long, resume for acting. He's been in everything. I mean, he was Saruman in Lord of the Rings. He played To a Devil, a Daughter, which is not a lot of people know that he did that film, but he was in that. He played a satanic Catholic priest. And so, the question that I have for you and what you've looked into is, are these actors just acting out in the films, and they separate this from real life, or is this kind of something that they take into their everyday practice, or what would you say to that?
That's a great question. It's hard to say. I think in the specifics of Christopher Lee, he's very, very old, but I covered him in detail because Dennis Wheatley was friends with him, and Dennis Wheatley knew Aleister Crowley, and one of his first villains was based upon Crowley. Wheatley knew Fleming. So all these guys are kind of in the same environment. And the rumor about Christopher Lee is that he had one of the biggest occult books collections of that time. And there's a question that's asked to him in the movie. He's like, "How many? I heard that you have the biggest book." And he says only 4 or 5, and people laugh. But I think that he's actually deflecting that. So he definitely was, as a kind of a malevolent character in a lot of these films, particularly The Wicker Man, which is like brings to mind this movie Midsommar that just came out, which is also pagan sacrifice. I haven't seen this Midsommar yet, but I heard it's pretty brutal. But Wicker Man is very terrifying. And so Christopher Lee, whether he's actually acting out some of the knowledge that he knows, it's hard to say. I don't know. But I think that some of them definitely do. I think some of these guys are definitely involved in occultism and are involved in movies, knowing, I mean, you could probably, I think Nicolas Cage knows full well all about the occult. Has been in a variety of different, National Treasure, that involves kind of occult artifacts. He was in this movie, The World Trade Center, which I show in my film. Clearly has a 93 Aleister Crowley's number. Mm-hmm. And I think that film is kind of to me, it's kind of a propaganda piece by Oliver Stone. You see that Stone knows some of this numerology that included in Natural Born Killers. So I do think that they know, and I think that Hollywood really is an epicenter of kind of the secret religion. So even the name Hollywood, people talk about it referring to the holly tree that you make a wand out of. So I think really from the beginning it attracted people of that type. And I don't think that people of kind of a Christian background are really welcome at all in Hollywood. And there's all kinds of dark stuff that happens under the surface there. So
Yeah.
to say that they're all into the occult, it's hard for me to tell, but I could name names. Johnny Depp is an occultist, and his films all involve some type of occult principles. In general, I can't say all. There's a very significant amount. And the movie that I covered was when he was with Roman Polanski, who's relevant today because the 50th anniversary of the satanic influence murders of Sharon Tate and the LaBianca family are on August 8th. So they're really only about 6 days away.
Wow.
But yeah, so I do think that, some of these actors, like, you definitely know the occult. I think Johnny Depp is heavily involved in the occult, and I cover him in a lot of my videos about the West Memphis 3 murders because he was a supporter of Damien Eccles, who was killing 3 8-year-old kids. He was also kind of a cause celeb person in all these Hollywood types. You could go through the list of Hollywood people who supported their release. So in 2011. So there's definitely an occult Hollywood tie-in with that murder.
Yeah, it's fascinating. So I guess that kind of lends to the question then, like, should we as Christians or people who claim to know Jesus, like, support these people by like paying to see their movies and like supporting their lifestyle and all that kind of like, what is your view on that? Like, where do you toe the line, or where's the line drawn?
That's a good question. I mean, I think that like people like you, it's important to know these things, but also to support them, I think, is a huge mistake. And I think as far as followers of Christ, it's important to create that kind of economy or kingdom amongst ourselves, create our own influence of this kind of media that really would block out any even mention of Jesus Christ. So I think that at least, I don't know, like there's a place to go see Marvel's movies or, I don't really have any really gripes with that, or there are those types of films, but as far as supporting their occultism or any kind of wickedness they're involved in, no, I wouldn't support that. I wouldn't agree to support with that at all.
Yeah, and the reason I ask that is because, and I guess you kind of too have to take in your own, like your own spiritual sensitivity, I guess, because I'm just going to give an example for me and my wife, like for Doctor Strange. So Doctor Strange, if you guys aren't aware, is a movie that deals heavily in the occult because, this guy named Stephen Strange, who's a neurosurgeon, gets injured and he has shaky hands, right? And so he's looking for physical healing. Well, in the occult, there's a lot of physical healing that takes place, through New Age practices, through occult ceremonies and things like that. And so we started to watch this movie, and my wife, about 10 minutes in, was like, not watching it. I'm done. And she's like, you're not going to watch it in our house either. And I was like, dang it, but it looks so good. And, and so I don't have that kind of sensitivity. And so I guess we do have to take that into account, when we are watching this. Like, for example, The Ninth Circle or to a Devil, His Daughter, like those are pretty, if you're spiritually sensitive, those are hard movies to watch because they are so evil. Even watching your video with some of the child sacrifice that was going on in a few of the scenes, I was like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. I can't believe that this is actually being filmed. Like, what? And so, anyway, all that to say is, when we sit down and we watch movies, we have to pray the blood of Jesus over us. We can't just go in, let our brains turn off, and because the enemy is trying to communicate with you through these televisions. In fact, Steve Quayle, in his book Empire Beneath the Ice, he goes into talking about how TVs in the future could act as portals for entities to come through and influence you. And with the way the AI is going, with the way that 5G is going to be rolling out, I don't see that. I do see that as a possibility. And it's crazy to imagine, but with like the crystalline structure of the screens and everything, it just gives way to that new age crystal ideology. And so so that goes into my next question with talking about Doctor Strange was, the director of Doctor Strange, which is Derek Strickland. He claims to be a Christian. And so the question then is, why would you propagate all of this new age Hindu Buddhist ideology as the foundation for this hero, but then claim to know Christ, who adamantly opposes all of those teachings? And so I guess my question then is, how do we can the gospel and stuff be portrayed through evil like that, or do we have to separate the two and draw that line, like, hey, you're a Christian, you can't like write scripts like this and say this, or what are your thoughts about that?
Well, that's a tough question. I mean, I think for me, I wouldn't be able to do something like that, promote occult teachings or practices, but I think that's just really where I'm at. I think that somebody else makes that other decision. So yeah, for me, I just couldn't go. Yeah, I think it's a tough one because people grow up with their dreams to be a Hollywood director or something. They get an opportunity to follow that dream and say, here's your project. And you go, okay, I guess. So maybe that was Strickland's decision. I don't know. Yeah. But I wouldn't be able to work on that type of project personally.
Yeah, and same for me. And for example, I mean, we bring up Avengers just because it's like the biggest thing in the world right now. But I mean, all of those heroes they become heroes through like occult means, really. I mean, whether it be assassin training for Black Widow and Hawkeye, or whether it be, Spider-Man being bitten by this radioactive spider and all this kind of stuff. So
even the origins of the X-Men come out of a place called Magical Child in New York City, where the guy who wrote it, whose name I forget, was friends with the guy who wrote the Necronomicon. So the X symbol itself comes from the occult. That X inside the circle, you can see it on Aleister Crowley's Seal of Babylon.
Yeah.
So there is an occult at the very formation of the X-Men. They all have occult power. So
I know, and for me also, I was just because I was going with that was like I couldn't play like Thor, who's this Nordic god, who claims to have all of these like above these people and exercises authority over them, almost claiming to be Yahweh. And I don't know much of the origin of the Nordic god Thor, but I'm sure he's probably related. He's a storm god, so he must be related to like Baal in the Bible and along those lines. So it's like, why, like for me, I'm the same with you. I'm like, why would you ever want to step into a role where you're playing a guy who God, Yahweh, tries to obliterate, who wants his people to obliterate people who to worship this God? And so
right. The guy's name was Peter Levenda. So Levenda dated the wife or girlfriend of the guy who wrote the X-Men, who started the X-Men comic.
Dang, that's nuts.
Yeah, so they're in the same circles. Yeah, me and Peter Levenda.
But it makes so much sense. I mean, you look at the whole school and the way that they teach
right. No, it's like an occult secret society, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like you come in, you got a headmaster. You're supposed to fulfill these roles or do these duties. We're all different than everybody else. It's basically like Harry Potter, right? So yeah, I don't know what the manor's called, but it's kind
don't
of like
even get me started on Harry
Potter, right? So Harry Potter, here's your 11s again. Harry Potter added together is an 11, and he had 11-inch wand. So they're abiding by the same numerology and practices of magic, and probably the most watched, but probably over the Lord of the Rings, the most watched movie series in history, right? So all of these kids are being exposed to this without really any critical analysis, and you can get into all the alchemical stuff. Even Harry Potter, the name itself is an alchemical name, right? So you're using the clay. J.K. Rowling, do you know that the K in her name isn't real? That she she put the K in the middle, and the K is the 11th letter of the alphabet. And I would probably surmise, and I could make this argument, and I had this conversation a few times, that she probably was a front person for people writing that book. That she probably didn't. The whole inception narrative of Harry Potter is fake. And
like where she goes to this restaurant, Starbucks or whatever, and starts writing a napkin.
Right. She's a single mom, and she just had an idea, and she just comes up with this book. And there are some really interesting interviews in the very beginning of her career where there's a guy over her shoulder. They're talking together. So just like Shakespeare, I don't think actually Shakespeare wrote all the Shakespeare plays, maybe some of the sonnets, but it was probably the Invisible College. It was something out of Rosicrucianism there's actually some kind of weird invisible college right now amongst all these tech guys. They all get together. I forgot there was a researcher who was talking about that. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if she was a front for a group who wanted to have these ideas exposed to the whole global populace. So she's just a front. Wouldn't surprise me at all.
Dude, oh gosh, that makes so much sense. And I was going to actually ask you what your thoughts were on her, because I mean, the Harry Potter series has had so much influence over our culture. I mean, it's being even. I went to a Catholic college, private Catholic school up in Helena, Montana, and there was a theology course through Harry Potter where they went through the Harry Potter books, teaching theology out of those books.
That's crazy. That doesn't make any sense. That's the opposite of theology. But there was one other point. But it's really crazy about her story. So yeah. No, Harry Potter, there was I remember from the first book, they mentioned this guy, Nicholas Flamel, who was a known alchemist. So there's all kinds of modern alchemy in Harry Potter. But it's just hard to believe that story. Yeah. If you look at a lot of musicians too, they never talk about it, but a lot of musicians don't even write their own songs. They just perform them, right? So what if she's in the same role? She signed a whole bunch of NDAs. You're going to be our front person. And this is it. This is your book. This is our book. You'll get a cut of it.
The thing that is crazy to me, so I almost think in that, if let's say J.K. Rowling's whole Harry Potter universe was written by her, let's just say that was the case, it would almost seem to me with to develop a world like that. And this, I wanted to ask you about this too, since we're talking about Harry Potter. It reminds me of Alice Bailey or
right.
Helena Blavatsky with their automatic writing, getting this all of this input through channeling their masters.
Right.
And
this lady, Marianne Williamson, who's running for the Democratic presidential, she's a devotee of a fully channeled book, Course in Miracles, totally channeled by spirits. So it's right in front of your face if you're watching. So this is somebody who's on the debates and being exposed to all these people, man. So And Crowley himself did a lot of channel. I mean, you could argue the Book of the Law was channeled. The Book of Mormon channeled. You could probably argue that even the Quran is channeled.
Yeah. Well, it was, right? Because that's history. Muhammad was writing because he didn't have an education.
Ignorant, right?
Yeah, it's just crazy. But so I want to ask you then, so because we have what I've noticed in discussion with a lot of friends, because I'm anti-Harry Potter, I'm not even going to mess around with that. But what a lot of my Christian friends will bring up then is the Lord of the Rings and the Chronicles of Narnia. So how do you see those as different than Harry Potter? If there is a difference.
Well, I would say Harry Potter is definitely exposing you to witchcraft. I would say that Tolkien and C.S. Lewis are writers of a different stripe. So Tolkien was, I think, a known Catholic. So is C.S. Lewis. So they're probably just writing books that have different themes of, different. So I would say that they're distinctly different. Whether the book The Lord of the Rings is a Christian book is another question. It's got its own has its own universe. Maybe it has Christian themes in it. I've heard of Christians teaching out of it.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. I never was a fan of C.S. Lewis's The Lion, the Book, and the Wardrobe. Is that what it was?
Yeah.
And so I didn't really digest that. What are your thoughts about that? Did you read those books?
I did read them. And they are akin to Harry Potter. I mean, I don't think they have, from what I recall, I mean, this was years ago, back when I was in like elementary school. I should probably read them again, but I don't recall them having spells like in the dialogue between characters. Now, in Lord of the Rings, you do get a lot of the elvish, and then the wizards are saying their things, but for it to be blatant witchcraft, because I've talked to a lot of ex-witches and a lot of ex-Satanists who say that a lot of most of the spells in Harry that J.K. Rowling says are actual spells that are used.
Wow, I didn't know that.
Incantations and in ceremony. So it's not like these kids are just hearing innocent words. Like these words have spiritual meaning behind them and actually do something in the spiritual realm. And so for me, that would be a huge difference between the proponents of Harry Potter versus the proponents of C.S. Lewis and Tolkien. First of all, their worldview, right? So the worldview of J.K. Rowling was, whether she wrote it or not, was witchcraft and Wiccan and all of these other things. And then J.K. Rowling and C.S. Lewis, or Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, whatever your view on them, they had a more biblical worldview, I think, than J.K. And so they were writing through those worldviews and presenting elves and all of these mythical fairy tale creatures through that lens, and to create a story, right? And to get the gospel. And so that kind of goes into, back to the whole Doctor Strange thing. Was, I guess you can use these things to teach the gospel, to teach like the truths of Scripture, and that, to lay down one's life is the greatest source of love, but then you find those themes in Harry Potter. And so it's a hard road for me but I just stay away from Harry Potter altogether for that reason. But
well, here's the other thing, right? So you have like guys like C.S. Lewis, G.K. Chesterton writing very poignant, very important Christian works, but also writing fiction. Mm-hmm. So if the viewer knows that one is nonfiction and one is fiction, doesn't that know that doesn't the reader know that they may not get total Christian doctrine out of this? And is it okay to, as a Christian, to engage in the reading of fiction?
Yeah.
I mean, is that, for me as a reading, I mean, you don't have to be serious all the time. Is there a place for comedy? Is there a place for something like that? So for me, I think that there is a place for fiction. There's still something probably edifying from some of these fictional tales, I'm sure, from Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe. And, there's a lot of themes within the Lord of the Rings, of fellowship, of community, of loyalty, bravery, of courage, right? So you're still getting positive moral lessons, maybe not in a Christian context. So, I mean, I think it's a tough question. You could probably write 10 books on the difference between. I think there's people out there who have, but what's the validity and edification of a fictional work?
Yeah. Well, and I think you're right, because that's a good point that you brought up, is that J.K. Rowling hasn't written any theological books on Christianity, and C.S. Lewis, like some of his Mere Christianity and some of these other works that he wrote are considered by, very high Christian theologians as one of the best works that have ever been written. And so you get an understanding of C.S. Lewis's worldview from those, and then you can kind of see him portray that through his fiction, which I don't know if you've read Mike Heiser's fiction novels, the Facade series.
No.
incredible, because he takes everything that he's been researching on aliens and UFOs and just implements it into this story and teaches theology through that. I mean, it's just great. You should check it out. But
so there you go. So you're getting a ostensible fictional teaching, but you're actually getting nonfiction, thinking you're getting fiction, right?
Right.
Which is probably a common theme within a lot of films, right? So you have themes of transhumanism, either positive or negative. You have themes of spiritualism, positive or negative. Some people are definitely integrating these in all these films that come out, even recent films. So I think you have to kind of look at it at a book by book or film by film basis, right? So if Mike Heiser is successfully sharing these ideas through a fictional novel, he's laying that foundation or the seed for somebody. Oh, I remember that idea or concept from Heiser's third book. Oh, now I see it in real life. Bam. Right? So he's edified somebody through fiction, right?
And I guess that's a good way to communicate truth through film as well. I mean, you could do the same thing as take some of these concepts and develop a story around it, and people grasp onto that more because it's visual, because they're getting, sound effects and all these different types of things.
Let's take Charles Dickens' A Christmas Story, for example, or It's a Wonderful Life by Capra. Not maybe not obvious Christian teachings, but still so important for the human being to see their lives in a different perspective, right?
Yeah.
Frank Capra, if this guy wants to kill himself, then he goes and sees how many people he's going to miss. Then this grouchy old Ebenezer Scrooge sees what he's done, right?
Yeah.
So still important teachings there. So you can see the validity of ostensibly fictional works are. 1984 is another example. You can see the nightmare political spectrum through 1984, which is a fictional work, but a distillation of non-fictional history and culture. So it's tough. I think that as a Christian, I think it goes back to what you said. You cannot sit down and look at something passively. Is this this thing I'm watching? Am I going to still watch it with a Christian perspective and think about it and discard what is worthwhile? No, I think that may be what it comes down to.
And ultimately, if we're going to take scripture literally, Paul says to glorify God in everything that you do, right? And so is sitting down and watching this film going to be glorifying to God, as
please not. Okay. Well, that's a good point. I mean, I don't know. So I guess everybody has a different thing. I actually think that in Christendom, it's okay to have downtime, or engage in things that are mirthful and joyful. It's not all drudgery or whatever. So, if you go, I don't know.
Yeah.
So
I completely agree with you.
Yeah. So it's a good, I think that asking questions, free inquiry, trying to figure out the best thing to do, is even researching this dark occult stuff, right? I mean, I wouldn't research it if I knew it myself, right? I never knew. I never had that kind of exposure. I wouldn't have known. But now, I'm watching 2001 in a much more occult way. It makes a lot more sense than what I watched when I was 12, right? So, I think it just comes from just having a very critically minded.
And I think there's a spiritual truth there for reading your word, because what you're doing is you're watching something in context, right? And if you don't know the context of the scripture you're reading, if you don't understand, for example, in Psalm 82, that God, Yahweh, is talking to other Elohim and telling them that they're going to be judged as men, you don't get the real meaning of the scripture and what David was trying to portray, and by writing that psalm. So I think that's super vital as well. Just like you were saying, now that particularly for me, since I've been doing research, I see that and I'm like, oh my gosh, that makes so much sense why they did it like that, because they're trying to get this across.
Right. Well, and I think that even if looking at kind of these occult things, then for me, I was actually thinking the other day about my first book, about Aleister Crowley. It's actually, for me, it's a very Christian book, even though it doesn't really even talk that much about Christ, because it validates and verifies the biblical worldview to a T for me. It's just like, right when you're done reading that, you go, this guy's a devil worshiper. He just disguised everything. So, sometimes these books that may have an oblique or not so apparent, obvious kind of view still can verify the Christian worldview for, somebody who's reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a couple more questions for you before we wrap up. The first is, we've been talking about Hollywood. We've been talking a lot about different types of movies, different specific people and stuff like that. So today, do you think the occult is just as prevalent in 2019 movies as it was, let's say, when Stanley Kubrick was writing, or when or when some of these other people that you focus on in particular in your film? Is it just as prevalent today? Has it gotten worse? Has it gotten better? What are your thoughts on that?
I mean, if you watch Sabrina the Teenage Witch, you'll say it's right in front of your face. That's on Netflix. So I do think that there's a very apparent stream of occultism in some of these shows. So yeah, I would say it's probably there's just as much of a prevalent segment in the whole film offering of all film offerings today as there was 50 years ago and probably 100 years ago. So I would say yes. And what was the second question? Well, there was a second question, right?
I was just asking, like, has it gotten worse? Has it gotten better? Has it stayed the same?
I think it's just still there, whether it's worse. I think it's still prevalent. And I think some of these films are definitely integrating these themes of the occult, kind of like, what you could do as a Christian where you're integrating these concepts. I think some of these films are doing the same thing with occult concepts. They're exposing people to occult concepts. There was a Johnny Depp movie called, it was basically about transhumanism, but it came out on 4/18, which was Crowley, like it's super esoteric, but it was Crowley's Kabbalistic number for his desire to illuminate the whole world, as in illuminate, Illuminati, Illuminism. And so, so it's still there. People are still being exposed to that stuff.
Yeah. Gosh, have you had a chance to watch the show The Order on Netflix?
No, but I've heard about it. Tell me about it. Transcendence is the name of the Johnny Depp movie.
Yeah, that's it. Where he puts his consciousness into this computer and lives forever. Yeah.
It becomes kind of like a god. It's basically like a technical apotheosis or whatever.
Apotheosis, yeah. Which is exactly what Aleister Crowley was teaching, right? How do we become as God? How do we become God?
Which is what Satan's original temptation, right? Yeah. So it's still there. It's still prevalent. It comes through different parts of the culture, yeah. Tell me about The Order. I haven't followed that.
Yeah, the reason I bring up The Order is because it kind of blends with that question in that I think it's becoming more prevalent, or maybe just less disguised. Because, for example, in The Order, it's a show about this kid who goes to a Yale-type university, joins a secret society, who's super into magic with a K. The main guy creates a golem out of dust, and so there's all of these occult. They're doing rituals on screen, so they're raising things from the dead. And then the other aspect of this show is that this secret order has been fighting this group of werewolves for a millennia. And so it's interesting because the guy who joins the Magic Secret Society actually ends up becoming a werewolf. And so he's being pulled from both sides. And the show, it only has one season, but it culminates with him having his mind erased because of everything that he's learned, and going back to his dumb old self before he got involved at this Yale-type secret society. So this
is a recent show that's come out recently, correct?
Yeah, it came out earlier this year or late last year. It's super recent, and it's fascinating. It's actually, other than the magic and stuff, there's no sex or anything, so it's actually pretty clean in that regard. But there is language, and there is obviously the occult stuff that goes on. So, well,
look at Strange Angel. That's been out, I think, on HBO or one of these other. That's a stone cold retelling of the story of Jack Parsons, Aleister Crowley's number one disciple in Hollywood. So, and that guy influenced a lot of people, L. Ron Hubbard. So even the founder of the gay movement, and I write about that in my book, Children of the Beast, used to play the piano or the organ at these ritual meetings, and he went on to be the most important gay rights activist. Harry Hay was his name.
Oh my gosh!
And and there's like an element of Crowleyism that do what you will through the inception of, and secret societies at the inception of the gay rights movement.
Yeah, and it's interesting that you bring Jack Parsons up because he obviously influenced L. Ron Hubbard, who has had a great impact on who? Tom Cruise and
Travolta. It's a great point. So you want to talk about real people into the occult? You could definitely apply the occult labels to Scientology, stone cold occultism. His son, Hubbard's son, said it was Scientology was black magic drawn out over a long period of time.
Yes, yeah.
When you think about it, it's right in front of your face. You just have to kind of investigate it a little bit. You realize, oh man, these guys are all in the occult. Travolta and Cruise cannot leave the Scientology because once you get up to a certain level, you have to confess all of your deepest, darkest secrets, and they take it and they put it in a file, and then they ferret it away. And you ever say you want to leave Scientology, they start leaking that stuff, man. And so those guys that have a lot of skeletons in their closets.
Dude, I know. That's exactly what I was thinking too. I'm like, man, Tom Cruise must have done some weird stuff if he hasn't left Scientology yet.
We can talk offline. I'll tell you.
Well, then you talk about Leah Remini. Like, how did she come out of it? And now she's trying to expose it. And
well, she's I really respect her. She has a lot of courage.
Oh man, I can't imagine what she's gone through.
But one of the biggest crimes against people is really the rape of the mind, and you see that as part of like the occult history. Is really people get into the occult, but there's a handmaiden or a side thing which is really about mind control. They really, and you see it even in performance, like Donald Cammell, Aleister Crowley, where they really want to get
Jagger.
They really want to get in their mind and control them, and I think that's really what Scientology is really a mind control cult that really turns people. One of Hubbard's axioms that he would repeat is, people are my slaves. And that's exactly what Crowley's idea was in Liber 77, which is the slave shall serve, which comes from a book he says you received from Satan. So you can draw these lines right up to the present, right from Satanism to the present, occultism. Yeah.
It's so good. But we're wrapping up on an hour here, so I got one last question for you. What's your plans for the future? You writing any more books? You putting out any more docs? Or
that's a great question. I'm very busy, and I've been working on a few things, but I've learned not to divulge or disclose anything I'm working.
You're a smart man.
There's things right now I don't even get into it, but stone cold copyright where I have titles of my books that other people have claimed are theirs. It's off the charts. So you got to really be careful, man. There's definitely people out there, and I'd say this to the listener and to you too. I wouldn't share any ideas of what you're working on, and that's just from personal experience.
Oh, okay. Well, I'll be looking out and for what you release, and I'm looking forward to it. So, but you guys, that wraps up our show today. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. Remember, you can become a member of the Daily Renegade. $10